There is a city beneath your lawn, and you have never once been invited inside. You have walked over it 1,000 times. You have mowed across its rooftops, watered its walls without knowing they were walls, and let a soccer ball bounce across its main gate. From where you stand, it looks like nothing. A small cone of loose dirt near the edge of the patio. A crack in the sidewalk with a faint dusting of sand around it. Something you step over without a second thought. The kind of detail your eyes have learned to erase because it has always been there, and it has never seemed to matter. But beneath that unremarkable little mound, in the compressed dark just inches below the soles of your shoes, there is a working civilization. It has districts. It has nurseries and granaries and graveyards. It has a climate control system more precise than the thermostat in your house, and a communication network faster and more efficient than anything humans built before the telephone. Tonight and every day you are at work and every hour you are asleep, that civilization is running, and it does not pause for you. Welcome back to Backyard Bird Mind. If you are new here, subscribe, because what you are about to learn will change the way you look at every crack in your sidewalk, every crumb on your kitchen counter, and every small brown insect you have spent your whole life ignoring. Today we are not looking up into the trees. Today we are looking down, into the soil, into the world of the ants that live beneath your yard. And what we find there is stranger, older, and more sophisticated than almost anyone expects. Stay until the end, because the last thing we cover is not about your yard at all. It is about a single ant colony that has quietly become one of the largest cooperative societies on the surface of the earth, spanning an entire continent, and most people have never heard of it. Chapter 1. The language written in scent. To understand what is happening under your lawn, you first have to let go of the idea that an ant is a simple creature bumbling around at random. It is not. Every ant that crosses your patio is a node in a communication network, and the language of that network is chemical. When a foraging ant finds food, whether it is a dropped crumb of bread or the sugary secretion of an aphid on your rosebush, it does not simply carry a piece back and stop there. On its return journey, it drags the tip of its abdomen very slightly against the ground, laying down an invisible trail of pheromone, a chemical sentence that says, essentially, food this way, follow this line. The reward is worth the trip. Other ants crossing that trail do not need to see the food. They do not need to be told twice. They simply follow the scent, and when they find the source, they lay down their own trail on top of it, reinforcing the signal. This is why a single dropped cookie crumb on your kitchen floor can become, within 20 minutes, a highway of ants stretching back to a crack in your baseboard. What looks like chaos is a live, self-reinforcing broadcast system, and it is more elegant than most human logistics networks. The strongest trail wins. The best route survives. Weak or unrewarding trails evaporate within minutes because the pheromone itself decays, and ants stop reinforcing what does not pay off. The colony, without any single ant understanding the whole picture, collectively solves a routing problem that would require a computer for a person to calculate by hand. But pheromones are not the only sentence ants can speak. There is alarm scent, a different chemical entirely, released when an ant is crushed, threatened, or attacked, that sends nearby workers into an immediate defensive posture. There is recognition scent, a unique colony signature carried on every ant's exoskeleton, which is how a guard at the nest entrance can identify, in a fraction of a second, whether the ant approaching is a sister or an invader from a rival colony. Every ant you have ever seen in your yard has been reading and writing in this language constantly, and you have never been able to hear a single word of it. Chapter 2. The architecture beneath your feet. The mound you see on the surface is not the colony. It is the chimney. Beneath it, depending on the species, a nest can extend 6, 8, sometimes more than 10 feet down into the soil. A structure built without blueprints, without a single architect, using nothing but the coordinated digging instincts of thousands of individual workers acting on local information. Inside that structure are chambers with specific functions, and the specialization is startling. There are nurseries, kept at a narrow and carefully regulated temperature range, where eggs and larvae are moved hour by hour toward whichever chamber currently has the ideal warmth and humidity. for their development stage. Worker ants physically relocate the entire brood, egg by egg, larva by larva, multiple times a day, chasing the optimal microclimate through the nest the way you might move a plant around your house to catch the best light. There are food storage chambers, sometimes stocked with seeds, sometimes with fungus that the ants themselves cultivate. There are waste chambers, kept deliberately isolated from the living quarters to control disease. Some species even build specific ventilation shafts, angled to catch prevailing wind and pull fresh air through the tunnel network. A passive cooling system with no moving parts, keeping the deep nest at a stable temperature, even when the surface above is scorched by summer heat or crusted with winter frost. Colonies of certain species, harvester ants in particular, have been excavated by researchers pouring liquid concrete into abandoned nests and waiting for it to set, before slowly digging away the surrounding soil. What emerges when the dirt is brushed away is not a haphazard tangle. It is architecture. Spiraling staircases of tunnels connect chamber to chamber in patterns that repeat with a strange, almost intentional symmetry across colonies that have never had any contact with one another. No single ant has ever seen the completed structure. No single ant ever will. And yet the shape emerges anyway, over and over, built by a form of intelligence that exists only in the aggregate, distributed across thousands of tiny bodies, each following a small set of simple rules. Chapter 3. The farmers you never knew were farming. Here is something that surprises almost everyone the first time they hear it. Some of the ants in your yard are not just foragers or hunters. They are farmers, and they have been farming for tens of millions of years, long before the first human ever planted a seed. Walk over to a rose bush or a young shoot in your garden and look closely at the underside of the leaves. If you see a cluster of aphids there, small soft-bodied insects feeding on the plant's sap, look a little longer. And there is a good chance you will see ants moving among them, not attacking, not eating them, but tending them. The relationship is a genuine agricultural partnership. Aphids feed on plant sap and excrete a sugar-rich waste product called honeydew. Ants harvest that honeydew directly from the aphid's body, in a behavior researchers call milking, gently stroking the aphid with their antennae to trigger the release of a droplet, which the ant then drinks. In exchange, the ants protect their aphid herd fiercely, driving off ladybugs, lacewing larvae, and parasitic wasps that would otherwise decimate the aphid colony. Some ant species go even further, carrying aphids to better feeding locations on the plant when the current spot is exhausted, and in autumn, carrying aphid eggs down into the warmth of their own underground nest to protect them through the winter, then carrying the newly hatched aphids back up to fresh host plants in spring. That is not opportunistic feeding. That is livestock management, practiced with a level of long-term planning that would be recognizable to any human farmer. And it has been happening in ordinary suburban gardens for longer than agriculture has existed in human history. Certain tropical and subtropical species take the analogy even further, cultivating fungus gardens inside their nests, feeding the fungus-chewed leaf fragments, and eating the fungus itself as their primary food source, a form of true agriculture, complete with something resembling crop rotation and pest management, that predates human farming by an estimated 50 million years. Chapter 4. The Undertakers and the Strange Dignity of the Colony's Dead. Inside every mature ant colony, there exists a role that most people would never guess exists at all. The Undertaker. When an ant dies inside the nest, its body begins to chemically change almost immediately as it decomposes, releasing a compound called oleic acid. Nestmates detect that compound with extraordinary precision. And within a short window, a small number of workers, sometimes the same individuals repeatedly, take on the specific task of carrying the corpse away from the living chambers and depositing it in a designated area outside the nest entrance, a literal cemetery, used again and again over the colony's lifetime. Researchers have run a striking experiment to confirm this is chemical, not visual. If you dab a living, healthy ant with a small amount of oleic acid, its nestmates will pick it up and carry it, struggling, to the cemetery pile, treating a perfectly alive individual as a corpse simply because of the chemical signal on its body. The ant will groom the substance off, return to the nest and resume its normal life. But for those few minutes, the colony's chemical logic overrides everything else it can see with its own eyes. This behavior, sometimes called necrophoresis, prevents disease from spreading through the densely packed underground population, keeping the living chambers sanitary in a way that mirrors, with eerie precision, the public health logic behind human cemeteries and quarantine practices, evolved independently, with no nervous system capable of understanding why it works. Only that colonies which do it survive better than colonies which do not. Chapter 5. The wars fought in inches, entirely out of sight. Beneath the calm surface of your yard, there is very often a slow, grinding territorial conflict happening between neighboring colonies. A war fought in millimeters, never covered by any headline, and never noticed by the humans standing directly above it. When foraging trails from two different colonies intersect, the encounter is rarely peaceful. Scouts identify rival colony scent within an instant of contact, and skirmishes break out, sometimes brief and inconclusive, sometimes escalating into what researchers genuinely and without exaggeration describe as battles, involving hundreds or even thousands of ants on each side, fought over a strip of territory that might be no larger than a dinner plate. Some species conduct what look remarkably like ritualized displays first, a slow-motion standoff of raised bodies and posturing that can determine the outcome without a single ant dying. An assessment of relative colony strength that allows the weaker side to retreat before real violence begins. Other encounters end in genuine slaughter, workers dismembered, the survivors dragging the dead from both sides back to their respective nests. Some species, more disturbingly, conduct organized raids on the nests of other ant species entirely, stealing pupae and larvae to raise as a captive workforce inside their own colony, a phenomenon so close to biological slavery that early entomologists used exactly that word to describe it. And many researchers still do. None of this happens on a schedule, you would notice. It happens in the gaps of an ordinary afternoon, under the shade of a hosta leaf, in the 2-inch strip between your driveway and your neighbor's fence, while you are inside making lunch, entirely unaware that a small war has just been decided a few feet from your door. Chapter 6. The scale shift. From your backyard to half a continent. Everything described so far happens within the boundary of a single colony, a single mound, a single family of ants defending a single patch of ground. But there is one more layer to this story, and it is the one that changes the scale of everything you have just learned. In parts of the world, including significant regions of the United States, Europe and elsewhere, a single species, the Argentine ant, has formed something that should not, by the normal rules of ant biology, be able to exist. Argentine ant colonies in their native range fight each other constantly, exactly like the territorial battles described above, because ants from different colonies carry different chemical identities and recognize one another as enemies on contact. But the Argentine ants that were accidentally transported around the world by human shipping in the last 2 centuries came from such a narrow genetic sample that the descendants, spread across thousands of miles, still carry nearly identical chemical signatures. The result is a so-called supercolony, a network of what should be separate nests that instead recognize each other as one continuous family, cooperating rather than fighting when they meet. One documented supercolony stretches along the coastline of southern Europe for over 3,700 miles, from northern Italy through southern France and into the Iberian Peninsula, involving what may be billions of individual ants that, despite having never had any contact with each other across that vast distance, do not fight when workers from opposite ends are placed together in a laboratory setting. It behaves in every functional sense as a single society, larger than most countries, connected not by roads or communication towers, but by a shared chemical identity, inherited from a small founding population more than a century ago. Somewhere in that supercolony, right now, an ant is laying a pheromone trail toward a food source, exactly the way the ants beneath your own lawn are doing at this very moment, following the same ancient chemical grammar, playing the same small role in a structure too vast for any single mind, ant or human, to fully perceive at once. The conclusion: what the crack in your sidewalk was actually hiding. The next time you step outside and see that small cone of loose dirt near the edge of your patio, you will not see it the same way again. What looks like an accident of nature, a random pile pushed up by insects too small to matter, is in fact the visible chimney of a structure with farms, cemeteries, ventilation systems, and a language you cannot hear, operating on a logic more coordinated than most human institutions manage to achieve. There is no ant in that colony who understands the whole of what it has built. There is no architect, no general, no single mind holding the plan. And yet the plan exists anyway, distributed across thousands of tiny bodies, each one reading a chemical sentence left by another, each one adding one more word to a conversation that has been running, in some form, since long before the first human ever stood on two legs and looked down at the ground beneath their feet. You have been walking over a civilization your entire life. Now you know it is there. Tell me in the comments, have you ever watched a line of ants long enough to see where the trail actually led? Back to the crumb, back to the crack, back to the nest you never noticed was there. I want to hear about it. I read everyone. I will see you in the next one.